what he never said out loud. In the quiet space between two breaths, there are thoughts a person never shares, feelings that sit heavy on the heart, waiting for the right moment to rise. People often say that truth has a strange way of finding its path, that it slips through even the smallest cracks in life. And sometimes the truth hides not because it is inconvenient or dangerous, but because saying it out loud would make it too real to take back. And this story begins in that hidden space, in the moment when Keanu Reeves, known everywhere for his calm strength and quiet kindness, sat alone in a small room backstage after an interview, wondering if he had finally said too much. His hands rested on his knees, his breathing slow but unsure, because he knew that the question he had been asked on camera had reached a place in him he rarely let anyone touch. And he knew that when the clip aired, when the world heard his answer, people would react in ways he could not control. But even then, even as the weight of that truth pressed on him, there was something soft in his eyes, something warm, something almost relieved. Because for the first time in years, he had stopped hiding what Sandra Bullock meant to him. The interview had seemed harmless at first. A few questions about his latest film, some jokes about his stunt work, a gentle conversation about the importance of humility in an industry that often pushed people to become larger than life. Keanu had smiled, answered politely, offered pieces of himself without ever stepping out of the quiet shell he carried around his heart. But near the end, when the host leaned forward with that curious tilt of the head, when a simple smile curved across their lips, Keanu sensed something shifting. He could not have known that the next question would unwind years of silence, nor could he have predicted that his answer, soft and honest, would hit the internet like a storm. "What do you think about Sandra Bullock?" the host had asked, voice casual, pretending not to understand the weight of that name, though everyone knew they shared a bond that went deeper than most Hollywood friendships. Keanu had breathed out slowly, eyes lowering for a moment, because the truth he carried about her was something he rarely spoke of. The host waited, and the world would soon wait with them. He remembered exactly how his heart had fluttered, a strange sensation for a man who had survived tragedy, loneliness, and battles both emotional and physical. His smile grew without him meaning it to, as if just hearing her name brought a quiet joy he had no control over. He cleared his throat and finally said the words that would send fans into the kind of frenzy he never sought. "Sandra is one of the most special people I have ever met," he said softly, each word slipping out with care. "She changed my life in ways no one really knows. She has this light, this kindness. She makes the world better without trying. She always has." The host lifted their eyebrows, sensing a deeper truth underneath the surface, but Keanu did not elaborate. He did not mention the moment on set when she talked him out of a dangerous stunt, or the way she had shown up for him quietly after he lost someone he loved, not demanding attention or gratitude, only offering comfort in the way only she knew how. He did not mention the nights they had stayed up talking about dreams, fears, memories, and what it meant to be human in an industry that often stripped humanity away. He said none of it, but his voice carried the echo of all those moments anyway. Fans would rewind that clip again and again, analyzing every word, every pause, every hint of emotion behind his eyes. They would argue online, some saying it was proof of a love that had lasted decades, others insisting it was simply deep friendship between two souls who understood each other. But no one would know the full truth yet, not until the rest of the story unfolded. Because behind those words lay a history full of near misses, timing that never aligned, unspoken feelings, and choices they both made out of fear, loyalty, and an understanding that love, in its purest form, did not always need to be acted on to matter. And still, even with all those layers, Keanu could feel the shift happening inside him as he sat in that room after the interview. For years he had kept parts of his heart hidden, not because he was ashamed, but because life had taught him that when you love someone, you do not always get to keep them. You only get to cherish the moments you shared. But now the world would hear what he had said, and they would search for meanings he had not given, details he had not shared, emotions he had not been ready to reveal. Keanu leaned back in the chair, eyes closed as he remembered the first day he and Sandra met. It was on the set of their film, both of them younger, still figuring out who they were, not just as actors, but as people trying to survive the chaos of fame. She had walked onto the set with that bright energy she carried naturally, a spark of warmth in a world often overshadowed by ego and competition. She had smiled at everyone, even the crew members who thought no one noticed them. She talked to the stunt team like they were family. She treated extras like they were essential parts of the story. Keanu felt drawn to her almost instantly, not because of her beauty, though she possessed that effortlessly, but because of her presence. She made everyone feel seen, and for a man who had spent a lifetime moving quietly through spaces, unnoticed and often misunderstood, that kind of energy was magnetic. They had spent hours talking between scenes, discovering that they shared similar values: kindness, humility, loyalty. Sandra had once mentioned that she admired people who did the right thing even when no one was watching, and Keanu had looked at her with a knowing smile because she had just unknowingly described herself. He remembered the moment they bonded over late-night food runs during filming, sneaking away from the set to find tiny restaurants where no one recognized them. Sandra always found joy in the simplest things: the sound of someone laughing nearby, the warmth of a hot drink on a cold night, the strange comfort of sitting beside someone who understood silence. Keanu admired her for that. She taught him, without saying it, that even in a world built on noise and attention, you could still live gently. Years later, after the film was done and both of them had moved on to other projects, their paths continued to cross, not constantly, but in meaningful ways. Every few months they would check in on each other, sharing stories about life, work, and the strange roller coaster of fame. They supported each other through heartbreak, celebrated each other's victories quietly, and always found a way to bring warmth and steadiness into each other's lives. Keanu had once told a friend that being around Sandra felt like standing near a fireplace after a long winter night, comforting, steady, and life-giving. He never said it directly to her, though. He feared it would complicate the fragile balance they shared. Yet even as he tried to keep those deeper feelings locked away, there were moments when they nearly broke through. One memory returned to him often, especially now. It had happened after a long charity event years ago. They both attended because helping others was something they believed in deeply. After the event ended, Sandra had walked to her car, tired but glowing from the joy of giving. Keanu had offered to walk her, insisting it was late and the parking lot was poorly lit. They talked softly as they walked, the night air cool around them. Sandra stopped suddenly, looking up at the stars, and whispered something about wishing people would slow down and appreciate the things that truly mattered. Keanu looked at her then, really looked at her, and felt something shift inside him. He wanted to tell her that she mattered. He wanted to say that her kindness was one of the rarest things he had ever known. He wanted to admit that she had become a constant in his life, even when they barely saw each other. But he did not speak. He only nodded and stayed by her side until she drove away, carrying the words in his chest like unspoken promises. Now sitting backstage with cameras still cooling from the heat of the interview, Keanu wondered if he had unintentionally opened the door to everything he had spent years protecting. The truth was simple yet complicated. He admired Sandra deeply, more than he ever let himself say. But he also feared what revealing that truth would mean. For her, for him, for the lives they had built separately yet with threads that always pulled them back toward each other. He opened his eyes, hearing footsteps approaching the room. Someone knocked gently before opening the door. It was his manager, holding a phone with a look that told him something unexpected had already begun. "Keanu," she said softly, "the clip is blowing up. People are reacting fast. You might want to see this." He hesitated before reaching for the phone because a part of him already knew what he would see. Fans were emotional, surprised, overwhelmed. Some were celebrating his words as proof of a love story long hidden. Others were defending his privacy, urging people not to jump to conclusions. But through all the noise, one notification stood out like a quiet voice in a crowded room. It was a message from Sandra, and it simply said, "Can we talk?" Keanu stared at the screen, his heartbeat quickening in a way he had not felt in years. Because he knew that this conversation, the one she had finally asked for, was something they had avoided for too long. And he knew that once they spoke, nothing would be the same again. And as he reached for the phone to call her back, unaware of the storm waiting on the other end of the line, he felt a strange mix of hope and fear rising inside him. Whatever she was about to say, he was not ready. And that was when the phone began to ring. The phone rang with a soft vibration that seemed louder in Keanu's ears than it should have been. He watched the screen light up again and again, Sandra's name glowing in a calm and familiar way, so ordinary, and yet suddenly carrying the weight of everything they had never said. He felt frozen for a moment, his fingers hovering above the screen as if touching her name would set off a chain reaction he could never control. He had faced dangerous stunts, emotional losses, and the unpredictable storms of Hollywood, but this, answering a call from someone who mattered more than anyone understood, felt like stepping into the unknown without a script to guide him. Finally, with a slow breath, he tapped the screen and lifted the phone to his ear. "Hey," he said softly, There was silence for a moment, not the kind that felt empty, but the kind filled with unspoken emotions. Then he heard her voice, warm and steady, but with an edge of hesitation that told him she was choosing her words carefully. "Hey," she answered, just as soft, and suddenly he felt his chest tighten because he knew her tone too well. It was the voice she used when she was holding something inside, the voice of someone trying to stay calm while emotions swirled under the surface. The first seconds hung between them like fragile glass. Both of them knew the world had shifted a little, even if they had not yet said why. "So I saw the interview," she finally said, her voice carrying a gentle tremble that she probably hoped he wouldn't notice. Or at least a clip of it. Keanu closed his eyes, rubbing the back of his neck with a tired sigh. "Yeah, I figured you would. People are sending it to me non-stop," she added with a quiet laugh that didn't quite reach her usual brightness. "I woke up to messages from friends, fans, even my aunt, everyone asking if I saw what you said." He swallowed, not sure how to respond. Every word he had spoken in that interview had come from a real place, a place he usually kept hidden, but now that it was out there, he didn't know how to navigate the growing tension. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," he said carefully. "It just came out." She was silent again, but he could hear her breathing, soft but uneven. "It wasn't trouble," she said at last, "just surprising." He could feel her choosing that word with precision. Surprising. Not upsetting, not bad, just unexpected. It didn't calm him. If anything, it made him more nervous because surprising meant she was thinking. And when Sandra thought deeply, truths often rose to the surface. "Sandra," he murmured, unsure what he wanted to say next, unsure if he should apologize or clarify or simply listen. But she spoke before he could form the words. "Keanu, do you really feel that way? Everything you said?" Her question wasn't dramatic, wasn't emotional, wasn't loaded with accusation. It was quiet and honest, the way she always was when she wanted to reach the truth gently, not forcefully. He paused, letting the weight of her question settle. "Yeah," he answered. "I do." His voice cracked slightly, not because he was afraid, but because saying the truth to her directly felt more vulnerable than saying it to the world. "I meant it all." He expected relief. He expected warmth. He expected something that would ease the tightness in his chest. Instead, there was a shift in her breathing, a subtle change he couldn't decipher. "Keanu," she said slowly, "there's something I should tell you, something I probably should have said years ago." His pulse quickened. "What is it?" But she didn't answer right away. He could feel her hesitating, her mind weighing something heavy. And then, with a quiet sigh that sounded almost pained, she said, "Can you meet me? In person? I don't want to talk about this on the phone." He blinked, surprised. "Of course, where?" She gave him the address of a small house outside the city, a place he hadn't visited in years. It was her retreat house, the place she went when she needed peace and distance from the noise of fame. He had been there once long ago, during a time when both of them had been overwhelmed with work and life. He remembered sitting beside her at the small wooden table outside, watching the sun go down while talking about everything and nothing. It was a place for honest conversations, a place where the world felt softer. "I'll be there in an hour," he said, already standing up, already reaching for his jacket. "Keanu," she whispered, sounding as if she wanted to say one more thing, something important, something she wasn't yet ready to reveal. But then she stopped herself. "Drive safe." They hung up, the silence that followed louder than the conversation itself. Keanu felt his heart beating faster, not with fear exactly, but with anticipation mixed with worry, mixed with hope, mixed with the strange energy that comes when long-buried truths rise toward the surface. As he walked out of the studio, flashes from cameras outside cut through the dim hallway. His manager called his name, reminding him of meetings, schedules, obligations, but he barely heard her. Everything else blurred into background noise. Sandra's voice echoed in his mind, soft and uncertain, asking him to meet her. Something she should have told him years ago. Words that carried too much weight to be spoken over the phone. The drive to her retreat house felt like a dream he was only half awake for. The road stretched ahead in long curves, the city lights fading behind him until all that remained were quiet streets lined with tall trees swaying in the wind. He remembered coming here once when she had invited him for coffee after a rough week on set. He remembered how peaceful it felt to sit with her away from the noise. Now, heading back there after all these years, the air felt thick with all the things they'd never said. As he pulled into the gravel driveway, he saw warm light shining through the small windows of the house. It was a soft, gentle glow, the kind of light that made the dark world outside seem less heavy. He stepped out of the car, the cool night breeze brushing against his face. His footsteps crunched lightly on the gravel. For a moment he hesitated, wondering if he was walking into something he wasn't prepared for. But he knew turning back wasn't an option, not now, not when she had finally asked for this conversation. He approached the door and knocked gently. A few seconds passed before he heard footsteps on the other side. The door opened slowly, revealing Sandra standing there in soft, warm clothes, her hair slightly messy as if she had been pacing or running her hands through it. Her eyes, though kind like always, held a depth he wasn't used to seeing, something mixed with vulnerability and courage. "Hey," she said quietly, stepping aside to let him in. "Hey," he replied, stepping inside. The room felt warm, almost cozy, filled with soft lights and quiet shadows. She motioned for him to sit on the small couch, but she remained standing for a moment, as if she wasn't ready to settle down. He watched her, sensing her nervousness, sensing the weight she carried. "You look worried," he said gently. She let out a small breath. "I am." He waited, giving her space, knowing she always needed a moment before opening up. Finally, she sat across from him, her elbows resting on her knees, her hands clasped tightly. "Keanu, what you said in that interview, it brought back a lot of memories." "Good ones, I hope," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "Yes, but complicated ones too." He felt a flicker of concern. "Sandra, if I made things difficult for you." "You didn't," she cut in gently. "This isn't about public reaction. You know I don't care much about gossip. It's about us." The word us hung in the air between them, heavy with years of history. "There's something I never told you," she continued, her voice growing quieter. "Something I should have said a long time ago, but I was scared, and then life kept happening and the moment never felt right." Keanu felt his breath catch. "What is it?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, her eyes shining with an emotion he couldn't name. "Back when we were filming together, I had feelings for you, real feelings." She paused, letting the confession settle between them. "I thought you knew, or maybe I hoped you did, but when you didn't say anything, I convinced myself it was one-sided, so I buried it. I buried it so deep I almost forgot how strong it was, but when I heard what you said today, it all came back." The room fell into a thick silence. Keanu felt the world tilt slightly, like a truth he had been afraid to imagine was suddenly unfolding in front of him. "Sandra," he whispered, but the words failed him. She shook her head, her eyes glistening. "I don't expect anything from you. I'm not asking for something. I just needed you to know, before we bury it for another 10 years. He leaned forward, his voice trembling with emotion he couldn't disguise. "I never said anything because I didn't want to ruin what we had. I thought if I told you how I felt, I might lose you." She stared at him, stunned. "Wait, you felt something too." "I still do," he said quietly, honesty falling from his lips like something long overdue. "I always have." Her breath hitched, and for a moment neither of them moved, both caught in the shock of truths revealed too late. Then suddenly, before he could process her reaction, her phone buzzed loudly on the table, vibrating with urgency. She frowned, picking it up. Her face changed instantly, the color draining from her cheeks. "Oh no," she whispered, her voice trembling. Keanu leaned in, concern tightening every muscle in his body. "What's wrong?" Her eyes lifted to his, filled with fear. "It's my son, something happened. I have to go now." She stood abruptly, grabbing her keys with shaking hands. Keanu rose too. "I'm coming with you." "Keanu." "Don't argue," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You shouldn't go through this alone." Her eyes softened for just a moment, gratitude flickering across her face. But there was no time to talk, no time to think, no time to navigate the tangled emotions hanging between them. They rushed toward the door, hearts pounding, fear pressing down heavily as the night swallowed them. And just as they reached the car, Sandra's phone buzzed again, this time with a message that made her gasp, her hand trembling so violently she almost dropped the phone. "Keanu," she whispered, her voice cracking, "you need to read this." He took the phone from her gently, eyes scanning the screen. And what he saw made his chest tighten with dread, because the message wasn't just about her son. It mentioned Keanu's name too. And it said this wasn't an accident, the night of unanswered questions. The night air felt colder than it should have, as if the world itself sensed the shift in their lives the moment Keanu read the message glowing sharply on Sandra's phone. The wind brushed against the trees, making leaves shiver like they were whispering secrets across the driveway. Keanu held the phone tightly, his eyes locked on the words that refused to make sense at first. Sandra stood close beside him, her breath trembling, her shoulders tense as she waited for him to speak, or move, or somehow make the message mean something less frightening. But he couldn't. He swallowed hard, feeling a weight settle in his chest, a weight made of fear, confusion, and a sudden understanding that something much deeper was happening, something neither of them had been aware of. The message was short, unsettling in its simplicity. This wasn't an accident, and you both know why. Sandra's eyes widened as she read it again over his shoulder, her hand covering her mouth as if to hold back a wave of panic. "What does that even mean?" she whispered, her voice small, fragile. "Why would someone send this? What do they want? What does it have to do with you?" Keanu shook his head slowly, the tension in his jaw visible even in the dim light. "I don't know," he said softly, though uncertainty trembled beneath his calm tone. "But we need to get to your son. Whatever happened, he needs you. We'll figure out the rest after." Sandra nodded, though her legs seemed unsteady, her breathing too shallow. Keanu put a gentle hand on her back, guiding her toward the car. She hesitated for only a second before getting in, gripping the steering wheel with shaky fingers. Keanu took the passenger seat, his body angled toward her in protective alertness, ready to steady her if she faltered again. As they pulled onto the road, the silence inside the car was heavy and filled with things neither of them dared to say yet. Streetlights flickered past them like blurred memories, illuminating Sandra's tense profile, her eyes focused forward but distant, her lips pressed together to keep herself from breaking. Keanu watched her out of the corner of his eye, feeling a deep ache in his chest. He knew she was terrified. He knew that the uncertainty of what happened to her son was eating away at her with every passing second. He wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, but he could not bring himself to make promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "What did the first message say?" Keanu asked gently after a few minutes, keeping his voice low, careful not to overwhelm her. She swallowed hard, just that he was hurt, that he was being taken to the hospital, no details. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she blinked rapidly to keep tears from blurring the road. And then that second message. "I don't understand who would say something like that, or why they would mention your name." Keanu leaned back slightly, his mind racing through possibilities. He didn't want to alarm her further, but he also knew they couldn't ignore it. "Maybe it's someone trying to scare you," he said carefully. "Or someone looking for attention, you know how people can be." Sandra let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but without any real humor. "Maybe, but it feels different, more personal, like someone knows something about us." She glanced briefly at him before returning her eyes to the road. "Or thinks they do." Keanu didn't respond. He felt her glance like a whisper of electricity across the space between them. All the unspoken feelings they had just begun to unravel earlier that night now hung in the air, pushed aside by fear, yet somehow more present than ever. After a long stretch of silence, Sandra finally spoke again, her voice thin. "Keanu, do you think this has something to do with the interview, with what you said about me?" He considered her question, his expression tightening. "I don't think so. That interview wasn't about anything dangerous or controversial. It was just personal." He paused, looking out at the road as memories flickered through his mind like pieces of film running out of order. "But there were people on the crew, strangers online, journalists digging through our past. Sometimes when attention gets too intense, people cross lines." She let out a shaky breath, gripping the steering wheel harder. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why tonight of all nights when everything finally came out between us?" Keanu didn't answer because he didn't know. The timing felt almost unreal, like the universe pulling threads too tightly all at once. As they neared the hospital, Sandra's breathing grew uneven again. Keanu reached over slowly and placed his hand on hers. She stiffened, almost as if she wasn't ready to accept comfort, but then she relaxed slightly, her fingers curling around his with a quiet desperation. She didn't look at him, but the gratitude in her small squeeze said enough. The hospital lights glowed harshly against the night sky when they arrived, bright and uninviting. Sandra parked quickly, barely turning off the engine before getting out and rushing toward the entrance. Keanu followed closely, ready to catch her if her fear overtook her strength. Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic and worry. Sandra hurried to the reception desk, her voice trembling as she asked for her son. The nurse looked up his name, typing with the calm slowness of someone who didn't understand the urgency shaking Sandra's entire body. "He's stable," the nurse finally said. A doctor will be out in a moment to speak with you. Sandra's knees nearly buckled, relief and fear mixing in a messy, overwhelming wave. Keanu steadied her gently, guiding her to a nearby row of seats. She sat, elbows on her knees, hands covering her mouth. Keanu sat beside her, placing a steady hand on her back as she shook quietly. Minutes felt like hours until finally a doctor approached, his face calm but serious. "Miss Bullock." Sandra stood quickly, Keanu rising with her. "He's stable," the doctor repeated, "but he suffered a severe fall. We're still assessing the full extent of his injuries, but right now he's awake and asking for you." Sandra let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Can I see him?" "Yes," the doctor said, "but before you go in, there's something you should know." Her relief froze instantly. "What is it?" The doctor hesitated, glancing between her and Keanu. "He said someone was following him before the fall." Keanu felt his stomach twist. Sandra's eyes widened. "Following him? What do you mean?" He described someone watching him. He seemed frightened. He said he felt like he was being chased, and that's why he ran, that's why he fell. Sandra's face drained of color, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, God." Keanu stepped closer to the doctor. "Did he give any details? Anything about who it was?" "Not much," the doctor said, "but he mentioned your name." He nodded toward Keanu. "He said the person said something about you." Sandra turned sharply to Keanu, fear turning sharper, more frantic. "Why is your name involved? What does this have to do with you?" He shook his head, genuinely lost. "I don't know, but Sandra, I swear." And then, before he could finish, a loud shout echoed down the hallway. A nurse raced past them, urgency in her steps. Doctors nearby stiffened, heads snapping toward the sound. "It's room 12, someone yelled. "Get security." Sandra's heart lurched. "That's him," she whispered, eyes wide as she took off running down the hall. Keanu sprinted beside her, adrenaline flooding his veins, fear clawing at him as they reached the door. The scene inside made Sandra gasp and stumble backward. Her son was safe, but terrified, huddled against the headboard, breathing fast, eyes wide. And in the corner of the room, the window was open. The curtains blew inward with the wind. There were muddy footprints on the floor. Someone had been inside. Keanu stepped in front of Sandra instinctively, shielding her as he scanned the room with sharp, trained awareness, every sense alert. A security guard rushed in seconds later, followed by a nurse. "We need to secure this area," the guard said. Keanu turned to Sandra, voice low. "This wasn't random. Someone is targeting your family, and somehow they're trying to pull me into it too." Sandra's eyes filled with tears, fear mixing with confusion and anger. "Why would anyone do this?" she whispered. Keanu looked at the open window again, a chill running through him. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but there's something you don't know, something I never told you." Sandra's head snapped toward him, alarmed. "What are you talking about?" Keanu looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before, an expression filled with both regret and deep, heavy truth. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened," he said slowly. "Not to you, but to me." The room fell silent. Sandra stared at him, confusion turning into dread. "Keanu, what do you mean?" she whispered. He took a breath, steadying himself. "There's someone from my past," he said softly, "someone who's been watching me for years, and they're not just obsessed with me." He paused, his voice tightening. "They're obsessed with the people I care about." Sandra's eyes widened, her hand trembling against her chest as she struggled to take in his words. "Keanu, are you saying someone did this because of you?" He hesitated, just for a moment, but long enough to make her heart drop. And then he nodded. Just once, slowly, and before Sandra could speak, before she could demand explanations or cry or panic, the door suddenly slammed shut behind them with a force that echoed through the entire hallway. They spun around. Someone had locked them inside, and footsteps were approaching rapidly from the other side shadows at the door. The footsteps outside the hospital room grew heavier, echoing down the hallway like slow thunder. Sandra's breath caught in her throat as she instinctively stepped closer to her son's bed, her protective instinct taking over. Keanu moved in front of both of them, his body quiet but alert, ready to react if the approaching presence meant danger. The fluorescent lights hummed above them, flickering slightly as if the tension in the air had seeped into the electricity itself. The door handle rattled once, slow and deliberate, as though whoever stood outside wasn't in a hurry, as though they wanted the fear inside the room to build. Keanu steadied his breathing. He had been in tense situations before, moments when adrenaline mixed with uncertainty, but this one felt different. This wasn't a stunt. This wasn't a film set. This was real, unpredictable danger involving people he cared about deeply. And he had no script to follow, no rehearsed lines, no camera crew to call cut if things went wrong. The handle rattled again, harder this time, and Sandra's son whimpered softly, curling into himself. Sandra reached out to him, smoothing his hair with shaking hands, whispering, "It's okay, baby, it's okay, I'm right here," even though she wasn't sure it was okay. Fear trembled through her voice, but she forced herself to remain steady, wanting her son to feel safe, even in the middle of chaos. Keanu turned slightly toward Sandra, his voice low and calm. "Stay behind me. Don't move unless I tell you to." She nodded, her eyes wide, her breath shallow but controlled. She trusted him completely in that moment, not because he was strong or capable, but because she could feel his determination to protect them. A quiet reassurance lived in his presence. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Silence crawled down the hallway. For several heartbeats, no one moved. Then, suddenly, the door flew open. Not broken, not forced, but unlocked from the outside, as if someone had simply held them inside to terrify them before deciding to enter. A nurse stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, her face flushed from rushing. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, holding a key card in her hand. "There was a malfunction with the lock. I had to reset it manually. Security told me to check on you immediately." Sandra and Keanu exchanged stunned looks. The nurse stepped inside, worry in her expression. "Are you all right? Did someone come in here before I got here?" Keanu scanned the hallway behind her, empty. No suspicious shadows lingering, no intruders disappearing into the distance, but the fear still lingered in his chest. "We heard footsteps," he said carefully. "Someone tried the door. It felt intentional." The nurse frowned deeply. "I didn't see anyone on my way here, but I'll report this immediately. Please don't leave this room until security clears the area." She hurried away, the door closing softly behind her. For a long moment, no one spoke. Sandra wrapped her arms around her son, her chin resting on his hair, tears forming despite her attempts to stay strong. Keanu exhaled slowly, the tension in his muscles easing slightly but not disappearing. He knew the fear they felt wasn't from misunderstanding or imagination. Someone had been there, someone had approached the room, someone wanted to scare them, or worse. After a few minutes, Sandra wiped her eyes and looked up at Keanu, searching for strength she needed but couldn't quite reach on her own. "You said earlier that this isn't the first time something like this happened, that someone has been watching you for years." Her voice shook but didn't break. "Keanu, I need you to tell me what you meant." He hesitated, his gaze shifting toward the window, then back to her. This was a part of his life he rarely talked about, a shadow he carried quietly. But he could no longer protect her by staying silent. The danger had already reached her son. The truth had to come out. He took a slow breath and sat down across from her, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "Years ago, after one of my films, someone started sending letters," he began, his voice quiet, steady, but heavy. "They weren't like normal fan messages. They were obsessive, personal. They talked about things from my private life that weren't public, things they shouldn't have known." Sandra listened, her face pale, her fingers gripping her son's hand tightly. "At first it was small," he continued. "Messages left on my car, notes slipped under my door. I didn't think much of it, thought maybe it was just someone who needed help or attention. But then it escalated. They started showing up in places where I was supposed to feel safe, places only a handful of people knew about. My home, hotels, even a charity event I attended quietly." He looked at the floor for a moment, the memories threading together like dark vines wrapping around a long-buried truth. "I contacted security. They looked into it. They tried to trace the letters, but the person was smart. They never left fingerprints, never used anything traceable, always 2 steps ahead." Sandra's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" He lifted his eyes to hers. "Because I didn't want anyone else to get pulled into it, especially you." He paused, his throat tightening. "You were important to me, and I thought if I kept my distance, maybe they'd lose interest, maybe the danger would fade." The room fell silent again, charged with the weight of everything he'd just revealed. Sandra shook her head slowly, her eyes glistening. "Keanu, you should have told me. I could have helped. Or at least understood why you kept pulling away when I thought there was something between us. His chest tightened painfully. I didn't want to risk you getting hurt. I thought staying silent was the safest choice. Sandra looked at him with a mix of heartbreak and sorrow, her emotions raw. And now it's my son who's been hurt. Keanu opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a security guard entered the room, his expression serious. Mr. Reeves, Ms. Bullock, we need to speak with you, both of you. They exchanged nervous glances before following the guard into a small consultation room nearby. Sandra kept close to Keanu, her hand brushing his arm as if grounding herself. He didn't move away. He stayed right beside her. The security guard closed the door behind them and folded his arms. We reviewed the footage from the hallway outside the patient's room, he said carefully. There was indeed someone outside your door. Sandra inhaled sharply. Who? Keanu asked. The guard hesitated. We couldn't get a clear shot of their face. They stayed out of frame, positioned just far enough from the camera to avoid full capture. But here's the part that concerns us. He pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. The video showed the hospital hallway, quiet and dimly lit. Then a shadow appeared at the far end, moving slowly, stopping outside the room. The figure didn't try the door handle at first. Instead, they leaned slightly toward the room, as if listening. Then they lifted something from their sleeve, a small metallic object. Keanu leaned forward, frowning. Sandra's hands clenched tightly. The figure pressed the device against the electronic panel beside the door. After a moment, the lock clicked. Keanu's breath froze. The guard spoke again. This is why the door locked. Someone used a bypass tool to override it. Sandra stared at the screen, trembling. They locked us inside on purpose. Why? The guard looked at them both grimly. We don't know. He tapped once more, showing the last few seconds of footage. The figure stepped back from the door, standing motionless. Then slowly, very slowly, they turned their head toward the hallway camera, tilting it slightly, just enough to reveal part of their face. Half a face, blurred but visible. A slow, unsettling smile crept across their lips before they stepped into the stairwell and disappeared. Sandra's voice barely escaped her throat. Keanu, do you recognize them? He stared at the screen, his jaw tightening, his eyes darkening in a way Sandra had never seen before. Yes, he whispered. The guard looked surprised. Who is it? Keanu exhaled slowly, the truth heavy as stone. Someone I hoped I'd never see again. Sandra grabbed his arm, fear overwhelming her. Keanu, who are they? Why are they targeting us? He turned toward her, his expression haunted. Their name is Maya. The room fell into a chilling silence. Sandra didn't speak. She didn't breathe. Keanu's shoulders tensed as though bracing for an impact he knew was coming. She used to be a fan, he said quietly. But she became something else, something dangerous. She disappeared years ago and I thought it was over, but now. He looked at the screen again. The half-smiling face burned into his memory. She's back. Before Sandra could respond, a nurse burst into the doorway, her face pale and panicked. Ms. Bullock, she gasped, your son, he's missing. Sandra collapsed against the wall, her scream echoing through the hospital, the one who slipped through the cracks. The world seemed to collapse in on itself the moment the nurse's trembling voice filled the room. Sandra's knees buckled, her back pressing against the cold hospital wall as if the ground had tilted violently beneath her. The words, your son is missing, repeated themselves in her mind, echoing like a nightmare she could not wake from. Her eyes widened, unfocused, her hand clutching the edge of the nearest chair for balance. Keanu moved immediately to her side, gripping her arm gently but firmly, grounding her as panic rushed through her like a tidal wave. No, she whispered, shaking her head rapidly. No, that's not possible. He was just there. He was right there. Her voice broke painfully, each word sharper than the last. How could he disappear? How could anyone take him out of that room without us seeing? The nurse, pale as if she had seen a ghost, held out her hands defensively. We don't know what happened. The security team is already searching the building. He was there moments ago, but when a nurse walked in to check his vitals, he was gone. The window was closed, no sign of forced exit. We're checking the hallways and stairwells now. Sandra covered her mouth with her hands, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Keanu stepped in front of her, placing both hands on her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Breathe, he whispered gently. Look at me. We are going to find him. I promise you we will find him. She shook her head again, tears spilling down her cheeks. Keanu, my baby, what if she took him? What if Maya? Her voice collapsed under its own weight. Keanu tightened his jaw, fighting the sinking dread that coursed through him. He had seen the kind of calculated obsession Maya was capable of. She had watched him for years, studied him, followed him silently. She had slipped through shadows like a ghost. Now she had found a new way to strike through the people he cared about, people he loved. The security guard who had shown them the footage rushed back into the room. "We're locking down the hospital," he announced. "No one gets in or out. We'll find him." Sandra's fear sharpened into something fierce and trembling. "Take me to the security room," she demanded. "I want to see every camera, every hallway, every exit." Keanu stepped forward beside her. "We both do." The guard nodded quickly and guided them through the brightly lit hallways, past rushing nurses and confused patients who stared after Sandra with pity and curiosity. Her face was pale but determined, her eyes darting ahead with desperate focus. Keanu stayed close, ready to catch her if the weight of everything crushed her again. When they entered the security room, screens filled the walls, everyone showing different camera angles. Hallways, waiting rooms, stairwells, the emergency department entrance. A team of security staff scrambled between them, rewinding footage, zooming in, shouting instructions into their radios. "Start with the last few minutes from room 12, the supervisor called out, gesturing for the nearest technician to pull up the feed. The screen flickered to life, showing Sandra's son lying in the hospital bed, breathing slowly, his eyes closed. A nurse entered the room moments later, checking the monitors. She turned away briefly to adjust something on the other side of the bed, and then froze. "Wait," Sandra said sharply. "Stop, rewind." The tech rewound 5 seconds. "Play it slower," Keanu added, stepping closer. They watched the nurse turn her back for perhaps 7 seconds. Long enough for a shadow, barely visible, to flicker near the window. Something indistinct, something that moved too fast, something not supposed to be in the room. "There," Keanu said, pointing. "Zoom in." The image grew pixelated but clearer, a blur of dark clothing, a hand, the slight silhouette of a person leaning toward the bed. Then suddenly, the child vanished from the frame, as if pulled backward out of sight. The nurse turned around, startled, looking at the empty bed as if she had simply forgotten what she had just seen. Sandra's eyes filled with horror. "Oh, God." Keanu clenched his jaw, his voice low and shaking. That wasn't the nurse's fault. Whoever did this waited for the exact second she turned around. The supervisor shook his head. But how did they get him out? The hallway cameras didn't show anyone carrying a child, and the room's window is old. It barely opens more than a few inches. Keanu stared at the screen, the shadow replaying over and over in his mind. Maya was always careful. She studied weaknesses. She avoided cameras. She found blind spots even professionals couldn't catch. Sandra grabbed his arm, her voice breaking. "Keanu, what does she want? Why is she doing this?" He looked at her, painful honesty in his eyes. "She wants attention, control, and she wants to hurt the people who matter to me." He hesitated, swallowing hard. "She thinks taking him will bring me to her." Sandra felt her heart stop. "But why my son? Why not?" "Because hurting you hurts me," he whispered softly. Those words landed between them, raw and unfiltered. Sandra's eyes welled again, her heartbreak twisting into something she couldn't fully understand. She had always known Keanu was kind, steady, humble, but she had never seen him look so vulnerable, so afraid of losing someone. The supervisor interrupted with sudden urgency. "We found something else." Everyone turned. A security guard held up a small piece of paper sealed in a bag. "We found this taped under the bed. Looks like it was left there intentionally." "Let me see it," Sandra said, her voice barely holding steady. The guard handed the bag to her. Her fingers trembled as she held it up to the light. The message was handwritten in slanted, uneven letters. "You took something from me. Now I take something from you. Follow the signs if you want him back. Don't call the police, or he disappears forever." Sandra pressed the note to her chest, tears spilling freely now. "Keanu, she's going to hurt him. She's going to hurt my baby." Keanu pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as she cried against him. "I won't let that happen," he whispered fiercely. "I swear to you, Sandra, we will get him back." She clung to him, shaking violently. "Why is this happening now? Why tonight?" Keanu exhaled slowly, the truth sinking heavily into him. Because she saw the interview. She heard me talk about you. She thinks you matter to me more than anyone else. He paused, his voice trembling. And she's not wrong. Sandra froze in his arms. She pulled back slightly, looking at him through tear-filled eyes. Keanu, she whispered, her voice fragile. He cupped her face gently, brushing away a tear with his thumb. We'll get him back, he repeated, more determined than ever. Sandra closed her eyes for a moment, breathing shakily. When she opened them again, there was a new strength in her gaze, fear mixed with fierce love. What does she mean by follow the signs? Where do we even start? The supervisor stepped forward, clearing his throat. We found a second note in the stairwell where she was last seen. Show us, Keanu said immediately. They followed the guard to the stairwell, where a small white envelope had been taped behind a fire extinguisher. Sandra snatched it up with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was a photograph, not of her son, but of Keanu, a younger version of him from years earlier, sitting alone at a cafe, unaware that someone was photographing him, someone who had followed him quietly, unseen. A second note was attached. You ignored me, you forgot me, you hid the truth from her, now she will finally know who you are. Sandra's breath hitched, confusion overtaking her fear for a moment. What does that mean? What truth? Keanu felt every muscle in his body tense. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering something he had tried desperately to bury. Keanu, Sandra whispered urgently, what truth is she talking about? He opened his eyes slowly, his gaze dark and full of regret. There's something I never told you, something about the past, about Maya, and about us. Sandra shook her head, voice trembling. I don't care about the past. I care about my son. Just tell me what she wants from you. Keanu swallowed hard, the words painful in his throat. She wants revenge. Revenge for what? Sandra pressed. Before Keanu could answer, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the hallway. Everyone turned sharply. A balloon from the children's ward rolled slowly past the corner, drifting toward them. Attached to its string was another envelope. Sandra reached for it, but Keanu grabbed her wrist gently. Let me, he said softly. She let go. Keanu lifted the envelope off the balloon, opening it with careful fingers. Inside was another note. Longer, colder. To find him, you have to go back to where it began, the place where you blamed me, the place where you left me alone. Sandra looked at Keanu, shaking her head in disbelief. What is she talking about? Where is that? Keanu stared at the note, his face draining of color. I know where it is, he whispered. Sandra's voice wavered. Where? Keanu lifted his eyes to hers, haunted. The old studio, he said. The one where we filmed together, the one that burned down. Sandra's breath caught sharply. But that place, it's abandoned, dangerous. They closed it years ago. Keanu nodded slowly. Exactly, that's why she chose it. And then his expression shifted, fear mingling with guilt. Sandra, he added, his voice cracking, there's something you need to know before we go. But before he could say another word, Sandra's phone buzzed violently in her hand. A video message. She tapped it with trembling fingers, and both of them froze when the screen lit up. Her son was tied to a chair in a dim room, crying softly, calling out for her. A shadow moved behind him, and a voice, calm, chilling, whispered, Come alone, or I'll show you what happens when he cries too loudly. The screen went black. Sandra collapsed to her knees, a strangled sob escaping her. Keanu bent down to hold her, his own voice trembling. We're going, he whispered, right now. But Sandra shook her head violently, gripping his arms. She said, I have to go alone if she sees you. I don't care, he said, eyes blazing with fear and determination. I'm not letting you walk into that alone. Sandra looked at him through tears, torn between terror and trust. And then she whispered the words that cut him deeper than anything ever had. Keanu, I'm scared she wants you there, not to help but to hurt you. The hallway fell silent. Keanu swallowed hard, lifting her gently to her feet. Then she's going to be disappointed, he said softly, because I'm not leaving you, not now, not ever. But even as he said it, even as he held Sandra tightly in his arms, neither of them noticed the small security camera above them shift its angle. Watching them, recording them, as a soft whisper crackled through an unseen speaker somewhere deep in the hospital. "Good, come find me," the place where the truth waited. The old studio sat at the edge of the city like a forgotten ghost, its broken windows reflecting faint moonlight, its walls covered in shadows that stretched long across the cracked pavement. Once it had been full of bright lights, laughter, energy, and the birth of a bond that changed both Sandra and Keanu's lives forever. Now it stood silent, abandoned, carrying only the echoes of memories and the weight of a past neither of them expected to confront again. The wind whispered through the shattered doorways, brushing against the scattered remains of equipment left to rot, as though the entire building was holding its breath for what would happen next. Sandra stood outside her car, staring at the dark entrance. Her hands shook with fear and determination, her breath unsteady as she imagined her son somewhere inside, scared and alone. Keanu stepped beside her, his presence steady, warm, unwavering. He placed a gentle hand on her arm. "You don't have to do this alone," he whispered. "I'm here. Whatever happens, I'm not letting you walk in without me." She turned to him, her eyes glossy with fear and gratitude. "She said I have to go alone," she reminded him, though her voice trembled through the words. "If she sees you." "She already knows I'm coming," he said softly, cutting through her fear. "Everything she's done so far, it's been to bring both of us here. She doesn't just want you, she wants me." He paused, the truth settling like a heavy stone in the space between them. "She wants to punish me." Sandra shook her head. "You didn't do anything wrong." Keanu looked away, pain flickering behind his eyes. "There's something you do know, something I never wanted you to know." He took a breath, gathering the strength he needed. "Maya wasn't just a fan, she was someone I tried to help, someone who said I saved her life once. She told me I was the only person who ever treated her with kindness, and she started following me. At first it felt harmless. Then she began to believe we had a connection, a relationship, something that never existed." His voice faltered. "When I tried to create distance, she spiraled. She blamed me for her loneliness, for everything wrong in her life, and when I finally cut all ties, quietly, gently, something in her snapped. She disappeared. I thought she moved on. I thought it was over." He looked toward the dark building, his jaw tightening. "I was wrong." Sandra stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest, feeling the tension beneath his calm exterior. "This isn't your fault," she said softly. "You showed kindness. Someone twisted it. That's not on you." His eyes softened at her words, that warmth he felt only around her flickering despite the fear. "Sandra, we'll get your son back, and when this is over." But before he could finish, a faint sound drifted from inside the studio. A child crying. Sandra's heart tore open. "That's him," she whispered, taking a step forward before Keanu caught her arm gently. "Together," he said firmly. She nodded and they stepped inside. The air was cold, stale, filled with dust that danced in the moonlight, filtering through broken beams. The darkness wrapped around them like a thick blanket, swallowing their footsteps as they moved deeper into the building. Echoes bounced off the walls, making it difficult to tell where the sound was coming from. Sandra's breath quickened, her heart pounding so loudly she could almost hear it in her ears. Keanu scanned every corner, every shadow, every doorway with sharp awareness. Finally, the crying grew louder, clearer, pulling them toward a large studio room at the back of the building. The door was slightly ajar, a single flickering bulb hanging inside, casting long, eerie shadows across the ruins of old movie sets. Sandra pushed the door open with trembling hands. Her son was there, tied to a chair in the center of the room, tear-streaked but alive. The moment his eyes landed on her, a broken sob escaped him. "Mom, Mommy." She ran to him, falling to her knees as she wrapped her arms around him, her tears soaking his hair as she whispered, I'm here, baby, you're safe, I've got you." But Keanu didn't move toward them. He didn't breathe, because he felt the presence in the room before he saw it. A slow, deliberate clap echoed from the corner of the studio. They froze. Maya stepped out of the shadows. Her appearance was nothing like the grainy footage they had seen. Her face was calm, almost serene. Her eyes, however, carried a cold depth, a hollow intensity that made the room feel even colder. She wore dark clothes that blended into the shadows, her movements controlled and slow. "How touching," she said softly, her voice too gentle for the danger she radiated. "A mother finding her child, and the man who ruined everything finally here to witness the ending." Keanu stepped protectively in front of Sandra and her son, his voice steady. "Maya, this doesn't have to go any further, whatever you want from me." "Whatever I want," she interrupted with a quiet, chilling laugh. You still don't get it, do you? She stepped closer, her eyes locked on him. I didn't want anything from you, she said. I only wanted the truth you hid, the truth you kept from her. She pointed at Sandra, her finger trembling with fury. You should have told her who you are, what you did. Sandra's voice strained. What truth? Keanu hasn't done anything. He left me, Maya hissed, her calm breaking into sharp anger. He walked away from me when I needed him the most. He pretended I didn't matter. She glared at him, her eyes blazing. You told me I deserved kindness. You told me I had value. Then you abandoned me. You made me believe I was something, and then you ripped it away. Keanu's voice remained soft. Maya, I never promised a relationship. I only wanted to help you. You misinterpreted what I said. I'm sorry you were hurt, but what you're doing now. Don't, she snapped. Don't you dare pretend you're innocent. She turned to Sandra. He said the same gentle things to you too, didn't he? Made you feel special, made you believe he cared, and he did it while forgetting the people he left behind. Sandra stood slowly, placing herself between Keanu and her son. What happened to you was painful, she said softly, her voice steady despite the fear shaking inside her, but hurting others won't heal it. Please let us help you. Maya blinked, surprised by the softness. Her face softened for a moment, just a moment before bitterness twisted it again. No one can help me, she whispered, but I can make sure he never hurts anyone else the way he hurt me. She reached into her jacket. Keanu stepped in front of Sandra immediately. Maya, stop, he said, his voice breaking. Her hand trembled as she pulled out a small switch, connected to a device strapped beneath the old set platforms behind the room. Wires snaked across the floor, explosives. Maya, Keanu said, panic flickering through his voice. You don't want to do this. You'll hurt a child. Sandra, innocent people. Tears streamed suddenly down her face. I don't care anymore. Pain is pain. Someone has to feel what I felt. Someone has to lose what they love. Sandra clutched her son tightly. Please, she begged, don't do this. My son has nothing to do with your pain. Maya hesitated, just enough for Keanu to step forward. Look at me, he said softly. Maya, look at me. She looked, and Keanu did something Sandra never expected. He stepped away from Sandra. He stepped toward Maya. Slowly, painfully, deliberately. If you want to punish someone, he said, his voice raw with sincerity, punish me. Not her, not her son, take me, not them. Maya's breath hitched, her hands trembling violently around the switch. Keanu kept walking, inch by inch. I hurt you, he whispered. I failed you, I tried to help, but I didn't see how deep your pain was, and I am sorry for that. I truly am. I will carry that forever, but those two behind me, they are innocent. They deserve love, safety, a future. Don't take that from them because of me. Maya's hand wavered. Her breathing grew uneven, her mind warring against itself. The hatred in her eyes flickered, dimming, brightening, dimming again. You never cared about me, she whispered. Keanu shook his head softly. I care about everyone, that's the truth, and sometimes caring isn't enough. Sometimes we fail. I failed you, but hurting them won't heal you, it will only break you further. Maya's body went rigid. Her fingers tightened around the switch. The room froze. The world held its breath. And then, she dropped the switch. It clattered to the ground. Maya collapsed to her knees, sobbing, her hands covering her face. Why was I enough? She cried. Why didn't anyone stay? Keanu exhaled shakily, relief flooding through him. He kneeled slowly in front of her, careful not to startle her. You were never the problem, he whispered. Your pain was, and you didn't get the help you needed, but it's not too late. We can fix this. We can get you help, real help. She shook as he gently held her wrists. Security stormed in seconds later, disarming the device, restraining Maya as she cried silently. Sandra rushed forward, pulling her son tightly into her arms, sobbing into his hair. Keanu rose, watching them with a mixture of relief and exhaustion deeper than anything he had known. Later, after police took Maya away, after doctors confirmed her son was safe, after the chaos eased into quiet, Sandra sat beside Keanu outside the hospital. Dawn began to rise, turning the sky soft shades of pink and gold. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You saved his life, she whispered, and mine. Keanu shook his head gently. You saved your son, you fought for him, I just stood beside you. She looked up at him, her eyes warm and overflowing with everything she had never said. Keanu, You stood beside me when no one else could have. You were brave. You were kind. You were everything I needed tonight." He looked at her, the rising sun reflecting in his tired eyes. "I meant what I said earlier," he murmured. "You matter to me more than you know." She reached up and touched his cheek gently. "And you matter to me," she whispered, "more than I ever let myself admit." For a long moment they sat in silence, wrapped in the soft light of morning, their hands slowly finding each other. And this time, neither of them let go.